got an amazing show lined up for you today. We are joined by author Ron Felber, who is with us, and you guys are going to want to check out his books. But a little background, Ron is a graduate of Georgetown University, Loyola University, and Drew University, where he earned his doctorate, began a career writing stories for True Detective magazine and the iconic Nick Carter series, while working as a deputy sheriff transporting federal prisoners. The Runaway earned Ron the United Press International Award for Fiction, and he was the recipient of the Albright Award for his nonfiction bestseller Mojave Incident. Some of his books have made their way to film, television, including The Mojave Incident, Il Dottore, The Double Life of a Mafia Doctor, and The Hunt for Kun Sa. His most recent title, The Unwelcomed, The Curious Case of Clara Fowler, is based on a true medical case history passed along to him by William Peter Blatty, author of The Exorcist. Ron boxed Golden Gloves, holds a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and was CEO of a major manufacturing company for more than a decade. He teaches creative writing at Drew University, Kasperson School of Graduate Studies in Madison, New Jersey. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net and scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me. Welcome to the show, brother. I'm just so honored to have you here. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure, Brent. Thanks for having me on the show. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me as well. You and I have been talking for a little bit, and it seems the idea of exorcism and demonic presences has been, I don't know, absolutely epidemic in the paranormal communities, and I'm so thrilled that your book will be focusing on an actual case study involving medical professionals and so much more. But I have to ask you, how did you end up, other than your obvious relationship with William Peter Blatty, how did you end up going this direction with your work?
Well, actually, it was because of meeting William Peter Blatty. I was a student at Georgetown. I was a sophomore at Georgetown University when they were filming The Exorcist. So they had all the cameras there and the fog machines and, it was cordoned off. And I was a student and I was a writer. So I'd been writing really since the sixth grade. I'd been publishing short stories, in high school. And I had my first novel. So this was when Blatty was filming at Georgetown. I had my first novel. I just finished it. So it was probably filled with typos and everything else, but it was my novel, and I was, 18 and anxious if I could just get this to William Peter Blatty, who at the time had The Exorcist, which was the New York Times bestseller, for 56 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, if I can get this in the hands of this guy, and let's just imagine that he likes it, and let's just imagine that he says, well, this is good. I'm going to help you get it published. So with that dream in my head, I couldn't meet him directly, but I did go across the Key Bridge from Georgetown, across the Potomac to the Marriott Key Bridge, where he and his staff were staying. And he had an office with an admin. And I went there, hat in hand and manuscript in the other, and said, please give this to Bill Blatty. I'm a student just like he was. He went to Georgetown. Okay. And he wanted to be a writer, and I want to be a writer. And, it would really mean a lot to me if you could pass this along and tell him that. So she said, well, I'll put it in the stack. And there was a stack of about 70 manuscripts from all over the world, France, England, you name it.
Right.
And I said, no, please don't put it in the stack. I'm here. These people mailed it to you or whatever. I came across here. I'm in person. Here we are talking. All I ask is take this one manuscript, this one, and give it to Bill and tell him that we're very similar, that he was a student that came from the Bronx, New York. I came from Newark, New Jersey. He was on scholarship. I was on scholarship. He wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer. Just tell him I'm really him, except 30 years have gone by. And she did. Wow. So she gave it to him. And lo and behold, I went back for Thanksgiving vacation to my parents' home in my home too, in New Jersey. And he called, said, I like your book. I'd like to meet with you and discuss it. And he helped me with it, not with that book because it just wasn't good enough, but he gave me this story. He said, wow. You have the brains and the talent to be a fine writer. I have this story that I was going to do, but I've decided not to do because he was on to other things. But I uncovered it during my research, while I was doing research for The Exorcist. And here it is. It's about this woman in Boston, a Radcliffe student, Radcliffe College, 1898 to 1904. And she displays all the symptoms of demonic possession and is studied by the world's foremost psychiatrists and medical physicians at the time, along with a clairvoyant and a spiritualist. Mm-hmm. So they had a team, Dr. Morton Prince, Harvard Medical School, William James, Dr. William James, Harvard Medical School as well, who was the first to bring abnormal psychiatry into the mainstream. And then Dr. George Waterman, Prince's protege, Richard Hodgson, who was the president of the Psychical Research Society, and a clairvoyant named Leonora Piper. So that was the team. But that's how I got the story. I tried to write it, and frankly, I just wasn't good enough to do it. It was a complicated, difficult story. So I put it aside, and about 3 years ago, I had all the research done and whatnot. And so I said, let me give another whirl at this. And fortunately, it came out quite well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I was going to ask you. It's like, wow, that's quite a spread of time between when you received the information versus when you were actually doing it.
Brenda, I wrote 12 books in between.
I was going to ask you that as a side note, because you seem like you're very much an overachiever, and not I don't mean that in a critical manner at all. I mean, just all of the hats that you've worn through your journey, and yet to still find time while you're doing all of this stuff to write and to create and to teach. And it's just amazing. Your life must have been a racetrack.
Well, yeah, it was for a period of time. There was a period I had 3 kids, was married, had 3 kids. I was CEO of a large manufacturing company, maybe $350 million company. I was going to school at night for my master's degree and doctorate, and I was writing books somewhere in between. So, yeah, I was busy.
That's incredible. I mean, my hat's off to you, because I think, in order to achieve dreams, that's the kind of motivation you really got to have. And
particularly in the arts, particularly with something like writing or acting or photography or those kinds of the arts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's incredible. Now, the story of Clara Fowler takes place kind of at the turn of the century to the 1900s. Yeah. Would you say, and this is my question, because oftentimes when we think of old medical practitioners and stuff, that maybe they were less grounded in science and more grounded in the remnants of spiritualism and such. But that really wasn't the case, was it? These were truly academic and not prone to, well, it must be, spirits, right?
Well, the funny thing is at that time, there were about 9 million spiritualists. And these were people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, wrote Sherlock Holmes, Charles Dickens, the famous novelist, Madame Curie and her husband, who invented or founded X-rays, the X-rays. Lodge, Sir Richard Lodge, who was one of the premier physicists at the time, they were spiritualists. So there was a real spiritualist movement at the time. But counter to that, there was almost a countercurrent. And the countercurrent were people like Dr. Morton Prince, who was the primary physician involved here, who was a Harvard Medical School graduate and a lecturer at Tufts University Medical School. Mm-hmm. William James, and William James is probably the father of psychiatry as we know it, and a genius. By anybody's standard, William James was a genius. And a contemporary, like Prince, of Sigmund Freud.
Okay.
And then we had Waterman, George Waterman, who was Prince's protege, but all again, Harvard Medical School, premier cutting-edge pioneers in the field of scientific exploration of the mind. Then on the other side, because there were so many spiritualists, and that was such a strong current at the time, if Prince's study of demonic possession of this case was going to be credible, he had to include on the other side the other approach. And so he had Dr. Richard Hodgson, who was a psychical researcher, and he had a clairvoyant, Leonora Piper, all part of the team that studied Clara Fowler and tried to cure her, but from two different points of view. I mean, clearly Hodgson, for example, this was demonic possession. William James was somewhere in the middle, and Morton Prince was adamant that this disease, if you want to call it that, this phenomenon that had gone on for thousands and thousands of years, that with the cleansing light of science, he would delve into this and find out what the cause was. And from him, it would be something like an chemical imbalance in the brain, a brain lesion, something physical that generated these symptoms, these incredible symptoms.
Wow. And without having read the book, and I'm really excited to read it, but was there a lot of supernatural activity attached to her condition? Absolutely.
Her voice would change into this bass, explosive, malevolent voice. Her face would literally remold. Oh. So she'd be almost a different person facially, her face would remold. Beyond that, she would fly into tremendous rages at anything that was holy. Bible, rosary beads, in church. So, for example, Clara Fowler would be at church, and she was very religious.
Okay.
So this was a 22-year-old woman, young woman, very bright, wanted to be a nun. She was in Radcliffe College, but her ultimate spiritual journey, was to go into a convent afterward. And so Prince referred to her as the saint, and the second consciousness as the demon, for good reasons. In her saintly state, Clara Fowler would see visitations from the Virgin Mary and from Jesus Christ. So she thought she had a religious calling, a deep religious calling. But in the second state, and they studied it deeply, the demonic state felt no pain, had no need for food, had no need for sleep, was free of illness, was immune from illness, didn't suffer from fatigue, and also was awake 24/7. So the demonic state knew everything, every dream, every little thought that went through Clara Fowler's head, and used it with great effect against her.
Oh, God, that's gotta be just a fresh kind of hell to live through. And that poor woman. Did they ever figure out where this might have come in?
Well, yeah, it's when Blatty looked at the story, and I think he looked at it as research. It was research for The Exorcist. It was one of the couple of cases that he used as a template, let's say, for his story.
Mm-hmm.
But, he researched it, but I don't think he understood because he didn't research it deeply. I hired a detective and everything. I didn't realize either the extent of the story, but actually there are 3 murders involved.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And without giving away too much, there was a satanic cult in Fall River at the time.
Oh, no.
And Clara Fowler, who was not a nice man, wife beater, horrible alcoholic, he was a member of that cult.
Oh, okay.
And so it was fertile ground for either argument. From Prince's point of view, it's fertile ground for dissociation, a dissociative state where your mind is kind of blown as a kid. And so you're a fractured psyche.
Yeah.
From Hogson's point of view, this was the pathway, the portal that a demonic presence entered into her world.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I'd mentioned that she had these symptoms, these thoughts, whatever, that the demonic presence was very well aware of, moment to moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, what it realized was that when Clara was weakest, physically weakest, it could come more easily.
Oh, sure.
And there were times when Prince and the group witnessed this, what do I call it?
Transformation.
This back and forth between the demonic and her. And she's screaming for help, and the demonic presence starts talking, your mind, this body is mine. And they go back and forth with tremendous regularity. So it's almost like a spinning top. And because the demonic presence fought for the body and could come more easily when she was fatigued, it would take her on long walks. She'd have missing time where she'd walk 10 miles.
Oh.
She'd have no shoes. She'd have a torn dress, and she'd wake up. She wouldn't know where she was or how she got there. And then she'd have to figure out how to get back again. If she tried to eat, she'd see worms and maggots in her food. It was a way to keep her from eating.
Yeah.
At night, she had horrible nightmares where demonic presence demons, gremlins, would loom over her bed. She'd have these nightmares of being in a procession with robed figures, with Satan literally lecturing her, screaming at her. So she wouldn't sleep. She was afraid to sleep because of these nightmares. So basically what you had is a young woman who was absolutely tormented to extinction.
Yeah.
No food, no sleep. And she came to Prince originally just with the symptoms of what they called neurasthenia, which is this sort of terrible fatigue.
Sure.
But he hypnotized her, trying to give her suggestions about, you will sleep well at night. You will have a healthy appetite. You'll feel content. You'll be healthy. And all of a sudden, this voice, like totally unlike her, and the eyes totally unlike her, say, she will not sleep well at night. She will not eat and be healthy. And so Prince would go, who am I talking to? And it would just this brooding silence, just combing the corners of the room, And finally, he would say, because he'd say, I'm not Clara Fowler. I'm not Clara Fowler. I'm spirit. And so he would press it. He goes, well, if you're a spirit and you're not Clara Fowler, you have the same hands that she does. You have the same arms and legs that she does. How do you explain that? And it would brood. And finally it would just burst out. I am the devil and I want her dead. Like that.
Oh.
Very powerful.
Oh.
Very, very spooky.
Yeah. Yeah, that's creepy stuff. Creepy. And that, when you were saying that it didn't register pain, it didn't register hunger, it didn't sleep. That's exactly what was occurring to me, because there seems to be a commonality in true possession or oppression, and it's a war of attrition. It truly is where, I mean, obviously without nutritional benefit, you're going to get lethargic. You're going to get weak. It probably affects, for lack of a better term, our energy or aura. And sleep deprivation, of course, just raises havoc on the body and the mind. And I mean, there's a reason that psychological warfare and interrogation techniques usually involve those elements just to weaken.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So Brent, she would wake up in the morning and find letters. She'd find her money ripped up, for example, her clothes shredded. Sometimes she'd be paralyzed. The furniture would be stacked up high. She'd be on top of it, paralyzed, naked and paralyzed just for hours upon hours upon hours. Then she'd wake up and find a letter like this. This is an actual letter that was written to her by the demonic presence. Hypocrite, whore, how I hate you. The pains of hell shall come down upon thee. You shall find no help, no comfort in heaven or earth from my wrath. Not till student Clara is dead and puts a bullet through her head. Devil, devil, devil. Oh. So you can sort of see the torment.
Yeah.
That was literally plaguing, like a plague,
Yeah.
On this woman. Yeah.
The other thing I find incredibly interesting is that in her case and in others that I've become familiar with to some extent through the years, but in some of those cases, there is this almost spiritual tug of war between goodness and that dark evil, like they're pulling back and forth, and somehow the person is the rope, and it's...
that's really, really a good point. And, I teach literature a little bit, as I mentioned before we discussed. And one of my favorite books is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And really, that was his belief. That was what you just said is exactly what he believed. There's a spiritual tug of war that goes on between good and evil. And if you want to call good angelic or God or the creator, if you want to call the evil the devil, if you want to call it evil forces, if you want to call it whatever, it exists. So what label you put on these things is sort of arbitrary. Right. The fact of the matter is it exists. These things exist. There's a dialogue that I think maybe you would like. Why would a demonic presence bother with her in particular? Well, one reason I think is that she wanted to be a nun.
Sure.
The other is that she really had a calling where literally, she said that she'd seen, with visitations, like the Virgin Mary would appear to her in times of trouble and comfort her. So in that sense, it was a target. But then there's a more general one, and this comes from the book. So I'll read it if you don't mind. It's
yes,
not
please.
Long. Yeah. So one of the doctors says, why are you doing this to the demonic state? Why do I bother with a pathetic bitch like Clara Fowler? I do it because it's my job. God is dead. Jesus is in hell. Yet moment to moment, we fight for the souls of humans, sometimes by the thousands, often one at a time, each a small or momentous victory, and we celebrate those victories. Truly we do. And then somebody says, God, what about God? A tired general, incompetent, blithering. Angels have lost their confidence in him, knowing the power of the forces I command. It lowered its voice and spoke with scorn. The English would say he let his side down. It crept toward her. Another secret, and this is, I find, very interesting. Another secret, most are borderline, but occasionally we come upon a special case. Lizzie Borden, H.H. Holmes, the Ripper, countless others whose names you'll never know, and these by their own choosing become me, evil incarnate, prowling the earth with one purpose, to reduce God's so-called creations to the brutish animals I know them to be. That says a lot. I think that really explains a lot about the nature of evil and the fact that in many ways, maybe human beings are a kind of trophy.
Yeah.
That there is a kind of war going on, a spiritual war. And by the way, wrote a book on alien abduction, which was well received, called the Mojave Incident. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of similarities between demonic possession and alien abduction. There's more of a comparison than you would think.
Yeah. That's kind of funny that you say that. In the course of doing these shows, I've always marveled at the fact that so many phenomena seem incredibly similar. Ghosts, aliens, cryptozoology. Yes. We have these very similar things going on in all of them. And they almost, for lack of a better term, seem to at least have a rudimentary template to them. And like hauntings, they start out real subtle, and over time they become more empowered by whatever measure. Same thing with demonic oppression and such. It starts out real subtle with UFO stuff. When people are visited, it's these dismissible things, but the ability for something to appear, disappear, and many of the phenomena, it seems wildly related, including in terms of research. In all of those, there seems to be some form of electromagnetic component to these, where people are using tools and getting these anomalous readings that don't make sense. They're way off the baseline, and mm-hmm. So it is crazy. And to hear you say that is it just really correlates to what I've been thinking as well.
Well, what struck me, you remember this fellow, the intel officer, David Grush, testified before Congress. Mm-hmm. He didn't talk about aliens or extraterrestrials. He talked about interdimensional beings. Yeah. And there's a difference. Mm-hmm. Extraterrestrial clearly is not from Earth, but interdimensional means that there could be parallel universes, parallel worlds. Yeah. And, if you look at quantum mechanics and those kinds of relatively new views on physics and the nature of reality, I don't think many people would scoff at the idea of alternate universes or other worlds. Aldous Huxley in Doors of Perception talks about the other world. Sir Francis Crick, talks about what is reality, the case against reality, meaning what we see is not real. Mm-hmm. What we see isn't real. For example, something like light. You see light, I see light, but there's ultraviolet light, there's infrared light, there's radio waves, there's microwaves that we don't see. And his argument, Crick and also Huxley, is that there's a zero chance that what we see is reality. Mm. Pretty much what we see is what we need to see to get food, to get water, and to survive,
It's interesting that you say that too, because I've heard several times that we are actually perceiving millions of pieces of information per second, but our mental ability has to whittle that down to exactly what you're saying.
Exactly.
All right. I got to ask you this, because it seems to me that, I don't know, like in the course of my shows, when I discuss phenomena, sometimes it's not surprising when things get a little weird around the portal house. and I got to ask you, as you were diving into this, as you're doing the research, as you're compiling the facts of this story and creating your book, did things change for you in any way? Did you notice anything happening in your experience that was like, wait, this is kind of weird?
I didn't, but my wife did.
Did she? Okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there's this, how when you go into your garage, maybe you have the digital thing to let you in, and it flips open and you can open the garage with the numerically.
Yep.
So that's pretty much closed and it's pretty much latched. But I would say 3 times out of 10 in the last few weeks, this thing has been up.
Oh.
It's been unlatched and up. Mm-hmm. And so you say, well, is somebody trying to get into our house or through our garage? And I doubt that that's the case. Mm-hmm. But then I put it back down again and I make sure it's really, and it's left up again. So that's happened.
Okay.
And then another thing that happened was a couple of times in the middle of the night, my wife will nudge me and go, did you see that? And I go, no. He goes, no, there was like a shadow that passed across the room. And I said, well, so yeah, things get a little spooky on occasion.
Okay. Now, is that unusual?
Yes.
Okay. See, now that's curious to me because oftentimes, and I don't mean to stress you guys out or anything, but oftentimes one of the first things people notice when they're starting to experience activity is the fleeting shadows. The boom, what was that? I just saw motion. And a lot of times it's out of the corner of the eye and people look and nothing, and then suddenly, your cereal bowl's moving. No, I don't mean to, cause any alarm, of course.
But, I have a nice explanation for that. I don't know if you know Betsy Lewis.
I don't.
Stargate Radio. Delightful woman. As a matter of fact, she's Bill Blatty's sister-in-law.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I have a funny story about that, a paranormal story about that.
Sure.
But anyway, so she's a bit of a psychic, and I mentioned that to her, just saying, it's kind of weird and not so, doesn't feel so great, feels a little spooky. My mom had passed away a short while ago, and she said, that's not what you think it is. That's your mother telling you that she's still there. So that was a kind of comforting moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's good. I had to ask because, it doesn't have.
But I'll tell you a story that's really quite paranormal, I think, and interesting. So I'd written this book, Mojave Incident. Prior to that, it came out under the title, as a hardcover, Searchers. Mm-hmm. So that was quite some time ago that I wrote it. Maybe the original, 15 years ago, let's say.
Okay.
So she picked up a copy of it at a garage sale, a hardcover, and picked it up at a garage sale because she was interested in the topic. She put it in her office on her bookshelf with many other books. And about 5 years ago, she's doing her work on a computer and the book falls off the shelf. And it's the book, it's Mojave Incident. So she says, oh, you know what? I'm going to get a hold of this guy and put him on my show. Mm-hmm. So she did.
That's pretty
She calls
cool.
me, we do the show, and I mentioned Bill Blatty, and she goes, oh, that's my brother-in-law. Now, think about that for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, what are the odds?
Yeah, what are the odds? That's the way I judge these things. What would Las Vegas have to say about this, right?
No, I think you're right. And my next question that I'm curious about, it kind of follows on the tails of the last one, but how or has doing a work like this and diving into the absolutely, horrible, scary idea of a demonic possession and such, how has that changed you? Your perceptions of the world or what have you?
Yeah, that's a fair question and a good one. And it has changed me. I'm much more, when I started this, even when I wrote Mojave Incident, it was in passing. I was writing spy novels. I was writing suspense thrillers. I wrote the Nick Carter series, which is like sort of the American James Bond sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I wrote about what I wanted to write about. And I wrote about privacy and the Fourth Amendment and J. Edgar Hoover. And so whatever I really felt like writing about, fortunately, I was fortunate enough to find a good story and be able to write about it successfully. But the paranormal was not really on my radar screen. Mm. Like most kids, at least from my generation, who grew up with Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone, and wanting to be a writer, Rod Serling was always one of my heroes, as was Norman Mailer, as was Ray Bradbury. And so I pursued that in a very if there's a good movie on that topic, maybe I'll watch it, but not in a way that I had a serious interest, nor did I believe in it with any great, any great force. But since that time, I am convinced. I'm convinced of two things. One is that evil exists, and evil is real, and evil penetrates the minds and hearts and souls of individuals if you allow it in. Mm-hmm. I believe that. I also believe in goodness. I believe that there's a Mother Teresa, and I think that people make a choice. There's a crossroads sort of, and they make a choice. I'm a good person or I'm a bad person. But then beyond that, others make choices like Mother Teresa. I'm a saint. I am going to devote my life to God. Similarly, I think individuals say, I am going to devote my life to the devil. Mm. And these are demonically possessed in a slightly different sense, but nevertheless, demonically possessed. The other thing I believe is that, as I mentioned, I think we know zero. There's a zero chance that what we think is real is really real. Mm. I saw this, Misato Kaku, the astrophysicist. Oh, yeah. He was being interviewed. It's a great interview. Mm-hmm. And he said, these telescopes, the most recent ones, what they show you of the universe is like a pinprick. And then they blow it up and you see all these massive amount of stars. Apparently, there are like millions, not of stars, not of universes, millions of universes. And so I don't think we understand anything about what's real, but I would dare to say this, that a large percentage of what we don't see that is very real is spiritual. Mm. Is spiritual.
Yeah, I think that's
call it interdimensional if you like. Angels can be interdimensional if you want to call them that. Demons can be interdimensional if you want to call them that. Mm-hmm. God can be interdimensional if you want to call them that. It's semantics, but at the end, these forces exist. Mm-hmm.
So did the work in the Clara Fowler case change your views in spiritual terms at all, or alter them in any way?
Yeah, no, I think I'm convinced at this stage of the game. There's a quote and from Norman Mailer that captures this beautifully, and I put it in the back of the book. And I'll find it too.
Oh, that's good.
He says, the devil might be a presence from another universe. We might be fighting an implacable enemy out there, and the devil might be the agent of the implacable enemy, with God as the tired general fighting that war with his own agents of hope. I think what I've come to is that a lot of this phenomenon, whether it's ghosts, whether it's alien beings, extraterrestrials, whether it's demonic presence, whether it's angelic presence, which is very, there are a lot of photographs, incredible photographs of the Virgin Mary in Egypt, for example, on the internet and see them. They're really remarkable. So I think that these beings exist, these forces exist. And I think occasionally you get a peek behind the curtain, like this case or others, where you get to see a little bit of what's really real. And I guess that's where I've come out. That's where my beliefs have been reinforced for sure.
Yeah, and I think probably in your case, having that diverse background of experience probably was incredibly important, not only in your personal constitution, just to delve into these shadowy darknesses and yet keep yourself together. Because I think even by virtue of doing this show for me, it's been transformative in many ways. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a good base, you might lose yourself in all of this craziness. But certainly, I think that putting this information out there is only beneficial, and letting people know, look, there's things we don't understand. You had mentioned something that I thought was incredibly cool, and it's something that's occurred to me too. And that is that maybe the definition or the terms aren't as important, whether it's interdimensional beings or spirits or ghosts or angels or demons, whatever. We probably don't understand a lot of the mechanics or any of the mechanics of any of this and how it works. But the important thing is to be aware that they may and probably are part of our experience to some measure, and to, keep yourself true. But I've often said, I think we as a culture tend to just throw labels at things just because they're terms of understanding. It's like if I say I saw a ghost, well, everybody knows instantly what I mean. But if I try to explain to somebody, look, I saw this possible transdimensional apparition of energetic proportions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it gets a little confusing.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's very true.
Yeah,
I think that's very true.
Mm. Yeah, it's incredible stuff, and it's oddly frightening though as well, because I don't know, in your journey through this story, was there any key takeaways, like, well, maybe that's where it started going sour? Of course, I'm thinking of the Exorcist movie and this little, what was her name, Reagan in the movie or whatever.
Reagan, yeah.
And where these odd behavior just started, and it's like, well, she's wandering out and, in a sleeping stupor and wets herself in the middle of the floor. It's like, well, that's not good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it started in The Exorcist with a Ouija board.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Captain Howdy. Yeah.
Ugh.
And I think that you probably have to let evil forces in. I think you have to surrender to temptation. Mm-hmm. I'm not a usually religious guy, but I'll say this. I do know the Bible, when the devil tempted Jesus, he held, on a mountaintop and said, you can have this, you can have money, and you can have power. You can have all of the, the various things that tempt human beings. And of course, Christ rejected those things and cast the devil out. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I think those temptations are around us all the time.
Right.
I think they're human temptations. And I think you can submit to them. And at some point in time, for example, Darwin's whole thing is that it's about survival of the fittest. So everything I'm going to be doing, all my thoughts are really figuring out, how do I survive better, Mm-hmm. But that doesn't really hold up, I don't think, because, again, you have the mystery of evil, but you also have the mystery of goodness. And I think people have a choice. I think they have a choice. Am I going to be a good man, or am I going to be a bad man? And if you start, maybe it's a little like drugs. They say sometimes it's arguable that marijuana leads to this, to this, to this, and you wind up, going for the better high constantly.
Yeah.
Well, evil might be that way too, where, it starts out as hot water, and before you know it, you're in boiling water and you don't even feel it.
That's a good point.
You just acclimate and move in that direction until you become an instrument of evil, as you mentioned before, an instrument, a tool of evil. And I think most people, consciously given the choice and thinking about it, would prefer to be an instrument of good.
Yeah.
But I think that crossroads exists. I think you make that decision. Is it this road or is it this road? And ultimately, I think maybe that's the human experience in a nutshell,
That's incredibly profound. And I love that, because I think you're absolutely right. I think our most profound decisions just are forks in the road, and essentially you just make the best choice possible for yourself. And certainly human beings are incredibly fallible. And I think we're often seduced all the time. Maybe in the advent of our modern age, it's more than ever, because everything's, literally a mouse click away,
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah,
but also the same can be said for the good stuff. It's just a mouse click away. and making those same choices, but in a better light. So
yeah, absolutely. So societally, just to throw my 2 cents in, I think it's really important to have heroes. I mean, I think any culture needs heroes, and I'm not so sure they should be rap stars or this or that. I think they should be people that demonstrate integrity and good spirit,
virtue,
and a will to make things better, to make the world better. Yeah.
And it's funny in our modern age that we do elevate these performers to these pedestals, and essentially, and I'm not degrading any of these people. I mean, they work very hard, but they are playing a part. They are pretending to be something that inspires and such, but that doesn't, we often equate that, well, this is that person, of course. Well, no, Robert Downey Jr. is really not Iron Man.
Yes. And just because you have a good singing voice, assuming that you do, doesn't mean you know anything about, I don't know, how to live your life. It just means you have a good singing voice.
Yeah, exactly. You got a talent for melody doesn't mean you got everything else figured out. Good point. Very good point. Yeah. So Ron, when does the book come out?
Well, the book is available for pre-order right now. Do you mind if I hold? I have the cover.
Please, yeah.
That's the cover right here.
Oh, beautiful.
And it's available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble and any of the online, booksellers. And you can pre-order it, and it'll be distributed in May. So we're a little bit ahead of the curve. But for me, it's very important because the more pre-orders there are, the more books are printed and the more distribution. And so, that's important from my standpoint.
Absolutely. I think it's an exciting book. Again, it's one you want to maybe read with the lights on, but it's going to be an incredible journey. And Ron, how can people stay in touch with you and what you're doing?
Well, I have a website. It's pretty easy. Ron Felber, FELBER.com. And and so that would be the way. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. So, those would be ways.
And are signed copies available then through your website, or?
They will be. Okay. I haven't quite done that yet, but what I'm going to do is probably arrange so that we can get some signed copies out to people. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Ron, it's been an incredible journey. I've really loved talking to you, and I hope you'll come back.
I'd be delighted. Maybe in June or so, maybe after this is distributed in bookstores, we'll chat again. I'd love that.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. And thank you so much.
I have a new story I'm working on too.
Ooh.
But I'll tell you about that next time.
No teasers, huh? Well, very good, sir. Thank you so much for making the time for us today.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Brent. Appreciate it.
Get out! Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on tonight's show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Paranormal Portal Radio, as well as finding us on Twitter. We're on Twitter at Paranormal Portal, PORTL, and we'd love to have you stop by our YouTube page and subscribe and check out our shows there. We got hundreds of shows, Journeys into the Paranormal Portal, so I hope you'll check it out, guys. We're over there at youtube.com/Paranormal Portal, so hope to see you guys soon. We'll be back, of course, for more podcasts in the coming days. So we love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other. Help each other out. Find the magic in every day. And remember to laugh as much as you can.